Hello and welcome to another episode of the UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Connor Moreno, lead writer for UCLA Bruins on SI. And today we're going to go ahead and move on to the defensive side of the ball. Last episode, we went ahead and tried to predict UCLA's starting offensive players. It was relatively easy just given, the way camp has gone. And whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the defensive side. This one has a little bit more variance, I should say, just because the defense was mostly revamped through the transfer portal. There are a few key returners that are going to be remaining starters, but UCLA's defense looks relatively new ahead of this season. So let's get into it. But before we do that, we do have an update on transfer wide receiver Caden Robinson. He is a transfer from Appalachian State who's been fighting for his eligibility. Yesterday, Monday, was his preliminary injunction hearing, and unfortunately, a judge ruled that he is going to be ineligible this season. Very tough news for Caden Robinson. He was in store for, I think, a pretty good year, but it's also tough news for UCLA. I mean, they lose out on one of Nico Iamaleava's projected top targets this season. But, I mean, hey, they move on. They still are pretty deep in the wide receiver room, so it would have been nice to have Caden. I do think he would have been one of the top receivers on the team this season, but that's just how it goes. And it wasn't just Caden Robinson. USC's DJ Wingfield was also in that hearing, and a judge ruled that their extra year of eligibility or whatnot just didn't have any commercial use towards it. So, yeah, a pretty unfortunate situation, but, we're just going to have to move on. And I'm just not going to be able to see Caden in the blue and gold this season. But, yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the defense. I will preference that this is not an official depth chart. I'm just trying to predict all the players that are going to be on UCLA's defense. Go ahead and talk about them, see if they're a returner, if they're a transfer, just give a little preview / review of their past seasons. And we're going to go ahead and start with the defensive line. So at edge, we have a transfer. The two edges I would say are going to be Devin Aupiu. He is a returner, and transfer Nico Davalier. Edge is a pretty important position for UCLA. I would say it's an important position in recruiting as well. UCLA was targeting some pretty highly touted edges in the 2026 recruiting class. But the Bruins also have, relatively good depth on the defensive line, not just the edges. You have, Anthony Jones, Keyshawn Bennett. Behind Nico Davalier, you have Grant Bucky, Jacob Buzik. So UCLA's defensive line, I think, is looking relatively good this season, especially compared to last season. And then on the interior defensive line, on your defensive tackles, you have Gary Smith, Siale Taupaki, and Keanu Williams. Those are going to be the main three players, especially from what we've seen in training camp and even, yesterday's Big Ten Network kind of behind the scenes training camp. Gary Smith was out there with, he was out there with linebacker John Vaughns. So Gary Smith is definitely going to be a big part of UCLA's defensive line. Gary Smith coming off an injury. Keanu Williams, Siale Taupaki, they're coming off. They're all returners. Aren't too many transfers on the interior defensive line like they are on edges. And yeah, that's the defensive line. Just going back to it, Devin Aupiu, Siale Taupaki, Gary Smith, Keanu Williams, Nico Davalier. They're going to be, I think, some pretty main names that you see. Linebacker has been a good topic of conversation through training camp. There are some really good names, some really good depth, but obviously the main starting linebacker who's going to be in the middle of the field, the Mike linebacker, is going to be John Vaughns. He's a returner. I think he's in store for a pretty big year. He might be UCLA's defensive captain, who knows, but he surely has been out there in medias and in practices, of course. John Vaughns, if you'll remember, he used to play baseball, but not this season. Actually, this is the first season that he's fully committed to football, which means in the spring it was all football, whereas he'd usually be out in baseball during the springtime. So I mean, he's been locked in for spring, summer, fall, everything. John Vaughns is completely bought into football ahead of his redshirt senior year. And then on the outside linebackers, the Sam and Will linebackers, we have Jalen Woods. He is another returner. He's in store for a great year. Has mostly been a reserve in the past few seasons, especially when Kane Madrano and Carson Schweschinger were here. Were at UCLA, and then he had to back up John Vaughns there as well, but he is going to be definitely a starting linebacker. And then on the other side we have a transfer linebacker, Ben Perry. He comes from Louisville. He used to be a safety. He has that kind of dynamism. The only flaws that he might have is he still kind of has that safety build, so he's not going to be as big or as I guess maybe tough as many of the linebackers, but he is still dynamic. He still has that kind of safety body. He's 6'3", 205, but so he's still so pretty much has some supreme athleticism. But yeah, Ben Perry's going to be starting on that other outside linebacker. And yeah, it's John Vaughns, Jalen Woods, Ben Perry. I think Isaiah Chisholm has also got a good chance of contending for some playing time. Deshaun Foster, ahead of training camp, ahead of the Costa Mesa camp, said that he thinks this linebacker position is the deepest room on UCLA. And I mean, I'm not going to argue with them. You got John Vaughns, Ben Perry, Jalen Woods, Isaiah Chisholm, Donovan Pello. Deshaun Foster said that he was pretty excited about him. He's a redshirt sophomore. Then you've got Monet Malafu, another redshirt sophomore. Ty Lee, another redshirt sophomore. So I think this UCLA linebacker core is pretty deep, and they're going to continue under Malloy. They're going to continue breeding some really good linebacker talent, starting with John Vaughns this season. Moving on to the safeties, I think safety is highlighted by one main player, which is transfer Key Lawrence. He comes from Oklahoma. Key Lawrence is going to be, I think, your main safety. Then you have Croy Stewart. He's also a good contender. Cole Martin, he's an Arizona State transfer. His father is the secondary coach, Demetrius Martin. I think safety is pretty deep as well. I think it's highlighted by Key Lawrence. This one is mostly made up of transfers. Not too many returners on this team, but yeah, I think your three main safeties this year are going to be Key Lawrence, Croy Stewart, and Cole Martin. And then you have some pretty good depth from Brian Threats and Scooter Jackson, Jaden Hudson. Some pretty good depth on the safety position. I think it's pretty underrated if you ask me. Now, let's move on to the corners. There hasn't been too much talk about corners in camp, I will be honest. But I do think that their starting corners solidly are Robert Stafford and Andre Jordan. Two transfers that are coming in. The secondary was probably the most overhauled group through the transfer portal. And then behind them, you have Roderick Pleasant from Oregon. Very fast. I don't expect Roderick Pleasant to be used much this season, but he does provide some pretty dynamic speed. Then you have Kanye Clark. That's a returner. Yeah, corner is going to be pretty top heavy, I believe, but it is still pretty deep. There's still a lot of names on the depth chart. And yeah, that's the defense. Let's just move on to specialists. I mean, the specialists should pretty much go without saying, but the kicker is going to obviously be Mateen Bagani. Punter, they have a new Tulane transfer, Will Carroll. He's an Aussie. Long snapper, Morrow Evans. Mateen Bagani was talking about he has a new long snapper, so that's going to be something that they've been getting used to in camp. And not too sure about kickoff returners yet. Not too sure about punt returners. So I'll get that when I can. But yeah, that is the defensive starting lineup predictions. And I think next episode we're going to go ahead and get back to our ranking of UCLA's most important games this season. I can't remember where we left off on because it's kind of been a while, but we'll get back to it And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. We'll see you tomorrow.